Hi, everyone. Today I have a beautiful, beautiful guest for us, and actually one of the first and single times when I get to dive deeper into a discussion about men and coaching men around sexuality, masculinity. We're going to talk more about this. I have with me Cam Fraser. He's from Australia. Hi, Cam.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Very welcome. And I want to read to you a bit about Cam and then we'll dive into the discussion. So, Cam is a certified professional coach, certified sexologist, registered counselor, and registered tantric yoga teacher. His work integrates scientifically validated, medically accurate information about sexual health with sacred sexuality, teachings from the mystery traditions. As a coach, he helps men go beyond surface level sex and into full bodied, self expressed, pleasure oriented sexual experiences free of anxiety or shame. Welcome, Cam.
Thanks so much. I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about male sexuality and masculinity and things like that. I'm really passionate about it, and my work as a
Mm.
men's sex coach allows me to do that. That passion for a living as well. So I feel like really privileged and really lucky to be able to do this work and to be on beautiful platforms such as yourself. So yeah, I'm stoked that you're having me on to have a chat about this.
Well, I've been following you on Instagram. I found you, I think, through the algorithm. And I want to say that in preparing for the next class that I have for mainly for women, I actually got a session with you to understand more about men and accessories. So, and through that discussion, I was like, you know what, this guy has a lot, like, not that I didn't see through the your Instagram account, but I was like, no, even for me as a coach, there's a lot here that I also have for me to learn, to get inspired. So definitely, I am honored and happy to have you here.
That's so lovely.
So I had a list of questions for you because you're not gonna give me that. Yeah. Eight questions. No, actually it's nine because I start counting at zero.
Yeah,
Pointing finger.
fantastic.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna dive straight into the first one. How do men view masculinity these days? So I'm talking about men in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50 plus. I'm not sure like what age range do you have in coaching?
Yeah, so I work with guys who are in their early 20s all the way up until I've got men in their late 60s, early 70s. So I'm happy to work with. I don't really have an age range that I specifically try and work with. But something that I often say is that masculinity isn't like one thing. Like there isn't just like a masculinity. There are multiple hundreds of different types of masculinities. Like masculinities is plural, not singular. And I think when we start to say, this is what masculinity is, right? This one thing, this is what masculinity is, then we start to preclude a whole bunch of other people from that definition or that description, right? It becomes prescriptive, and if you don't fit that prescription of masculinity, then you feel like less of a man. And so, in the work that I do, what I try to, I guess, what I try to do with my male clients is like, what does masculinity mean for them, as opposed to like, what is my definition of masculinity that I impose onto them. And so I really work with their own internalized understandings of what their particular version of masculinity is, and that's a client-centered approach essentially. But we start to explore that, and how does their expression of masculinity feel authentic and genuine to them. And for some guys, it's very stereotypical. It's like being masculine for them means to like go out and chop wood, and they've got to provide, and they've got to like be assertive, and they've got to be dominant, and like anything other than that for them personally means that they're not being masculine or they're not being feminine. And for other guys, it looks completely different. For them, being masculine is like being in touch with their emotions and being able to show some sensitivity and some vulnerability, and being able to um, like have deep and meaningful conversations with their partner, and to be in that space where there is some uncomfortableness, and there is some stuff they're unfamiliar with, and exploring that is and that intimacy feels like that makes them feel really masculine. And we explore the opposite as well, like what makes you feel really feminine, like what is definition of femininity for you. And oftentimes guys, mainstream guys that haven't done a lot of this sexuality work kind of have this idea that like masculinity is just kind of everything that femininity isn't. So if we labeled something as feminine, then it now, by virtue of that, can't be masculine. And so, like, what I see guys, I guess, like, what I see happening is because we've seen so much incredible development and movement in like femininity and women's, liberation and things like that. A lot of guys which are trapped in that mindset of like, being a man just means being everything that isn't a woman, or being masculine as everything that isn't feminine. With all this beautiful work that's been done in that kind of feminine space, we're seeing a lot of beautiful strides in that area. A lot of guys feel like their definition of masculinity is getting smaller and smaller and smaller because there's all this beautiful stuff that's happening for femininity. And so a lot of guys are stressed out and anxious and fearful of like masculinity is this thing that I'm kind of trying to hold on to, and it's really fragile and it's really precarious, and it causes them anxiety, it causes them tension. So all this is to say that I kind of don't really believe that like masculinity exists as a singular thing. I think there's like a whole myriad different interpretations of masculinity, and I think like when we get stuck in our head of like, well, am I being masculine? Am I being feminine? Am I in my masculine? Am I expressing my masculinity? Am I expressing my femininity? It gets really heady, right? And it gets like, it brings you out of your body, and it brings you out of your experiences of sensations of pleasure, or sensations of tension. Like it gets you into your head and you start getting anxious, right? And I get a bit annoyed at like polarity coaches, for example, who are like, this is what masculinity is, this is what femininity is, and you need to polarize, and it's like, man, how about focusing on just having a pleasurable experience with your partner, regardless of what it fucking looks like, and like, going into the experience, in an embodied space, rather than like, oh, am I doing this properly? Am I doing this? And oh, is she emasculating me? Oh, is she, masculine? And just gets all out of control. So that's a convoluted way of saying like, a lot of guys, I think, have a really rigid definition of masculinity, and that rigidity and fragility, right? Because it is fragile. Because if they do something that isn't masculine, then all of a sudden their masculinity crumbles, and they're now feminine or weak or emasculated or whatever it is. I think holding on to that like really rigid definition of masculinity is doing them a disservice. And so I'm a big advocate for like expanding your experiences of masculinity, the way that you show up as a man, like, really starting to push some of those edges that you feel with regards to like being quote unquote masculine, and whether that's through the way that you look, or whether it's through the way that you engage with your partner, or whether it's through the way that you self-pleasure, right? We'll talk about that, I'm sure. But like, that really rigid, narrow definition of masculinity really inhibits men's experiences of sexuality as well. Because it's like, what does it mean to be a sexual man, right? What does masculine sexuality look like? And for a lot of men, that's a very rigid, narrow definition as well. And it's like penetrative and penis oriented and heterosexual, and like it's very, again, very limited and very narrow. And so it's stifling men's expressions of themselves, whether it's through their, I'll go on and on, but it's like, it's stifling, right? And it's keeping men kind of confined, and it's also keeping them like insecure, right? And it's keeping them anxious. And the reason why it's perpetuated by so many men's coaches and so many like male authority figures is because keeping men in that state of anxiety about their masculinity, in that state of questioning of like, oh my God, am I man enough? Am I being man enough? Am I masculine enough? It's easy to sell you products then, right? It's like, it's easy to get money from you when you are insecure about your masculinity, because you're like, oh God, I need this thing so that I feel more masculine, so that I fulfill masculinity, or so I fulfill this version of masculinity that this person is portraying. It's easy to keep you in that spiral of like never being enough, and your self-worth being denigrated by these authority figures, so that you buy their next thing, so that you come back to them, so that you are validated in your masculinity, so you are told that you're man enough. And that's another reason why I have a bit of a gripe against like those types of coaches as well, is because there is some exploitative kind of ways of, managing their audience as well. So yeah, I won't go on because I recognize there's a few more questions, and I'll keep on ranting if you let me. So I'll pause there.
Don't worry. I feel your rant. I have the same issue with women's coaches and femininity, and if you're not in a certain way, dress in a certain way, talk in a certain way, move in a certain way, show yourself in a certain way, you're not feminine and therefore you're not desirable.
Mm,
Lately, it's also been down to colors. Like,
yeah.
so I feel you with that rant. I have the same one with femininity and polarity. Like, I
Yeah.
totally. Okay. So the next question that I had for you was, what brings men of any age to a men's coach?
Right. So the very common queries that I get from guys are all function oriented. And what I mean by this is like guys will come to me with concerns about not lasting long enough, or their penis not being big enough, or they're struggling to get and maintain an erection, or they feel like they don't have a high enough libido. Their sex drive isn't strong enough. It's all like function and performance oriented. It's like they want to last longer, they want to have a bigger dick, they want to get an erection quicker, they want to, they want to be more sexually active. And so there's this. This is a bigger kind of topic here, but like there's this framing of male sexuality, and this is reflected in the concerns that a lot of guys share with me, that like male sexuality is about function and performance, right? It's about like, and essentially a lot of guys will label themselves as having premature ejaculation, or they'll say I've got erectile dysfunction, or they'll say I've got like porn addiction, or they'll say I've got like low libido. And these are all like clinical diagnoses, right? Like these are things that you go and see a clinician for, that they go, all right, you meet these preset criterions, and then we'll give you the diagnosis of premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, whatever it is, low sex drive, hypersexuality, and then you're treated for that dysfunction, right? And that's a really shitty way of approaching sexuality in general, in my opinion, is to like medicalize and pathologize an experience of sexuality. But because that's the language and approach that we take to sexuality in general, and particularly male sexuality is, over medicalized, over pathologized. It's take this pill and you'll get an erection. It's take this pill and you'll last longer. It's very much like pharmaceutical oriented, and that's typically the first port of call. I've got a lot of guys say to me, I'm taking Viagra, I'm taking SSRIs because, that's what was prescribed to me. And, I'm still experiencing sexuality issues because the pharmaceutical isn't actually addressing the sexual concern. It's just like treating the function. And the function, it's like going to a mechanic, and I've got to fix this broken thing so that it starts working and performing the way that it's supposed to. And that is not like, that's not treating like men's approaches to sex, their experience of masculinity, their feelings of self-worth, their like underlying experiences of what sex means to them, their aversion to pleasure, all the other stuff, like psychologically speaking, which impacts their sexual experiences, is not getting addressed or worked on when you give them a pill, right? When you kind of say, hey, here's the. And so coaches do this similarly, where they go, okay, here's a breathing exercise. Great. Now you're doing the breathing exercise, and now you can last longer. Great. It's like, well, that doesn't actually change much, right? Because if the sex that they're still having is still approached from like a goal-oriented, performance-oriented mentality, then lasting longer isn't necessarily going to change their sexual experiences for the better. They'll just last longer and have the same shitty sex that they're having just for a longer period of time. And it's not gonna be helpful for them or their partner. So this is a long way of getting to my point here, which is, so when guys ask me about their function issues, what I start to do with them when I start to work with them is dig a little deeper than that. I start to ask questions about like, oh, if you come quickly, what does that mean for you? Well, it means that I'm shit at sex. Okay, well, what does being shit at sex mean? Well, it means I'm not a good partner, I'm not a good husband, or I'm not a good whatever. So okay, what does that mean? So it means not I'm not enough. I'm not man enough. I'm not masculine. I'm not whatever. I'm not enough. And there's self-worth under all of those concerns. It's like if I don't perform properly, then I'm not enough. I'm a failure as a man. I'm a failure as a lover. So that's like where the deeper work is, and that's typically what those physical concerns are really about. And so the stuff that I do with men is like shifting their perspective on sex and their approach to sex from being like performance oriented to being pleasure oriented. Um, because it doesn't matter what the sex looks like if the two of you, or however many people are involved, experience pleasure, right? If it was pleasurable for everyone involved, then it doesn't matter what it looked like, right? And so I guess like, you know, the term is phallocentrism, right? A lot of guys, like, sex for them revolves around their dick, and that's why a lot of the concerns that, you know, guys come to me with are like dick related. It's like, my dick isn't working properly, pretty much. It's like it's either ejaculating too quickly, or it's not getting hard enough, or whatever. It's, you know, not getting hard in general. And so, like, when their dick isn't working, you know, quote unquote, isn't working, then like sex for them is like impossible, right? And a lot of women have that same story, right? It's very phallocentric. It's the way we frame sex in our society, is like dependent on whether or not a penis is doing what it's quote unquote supposed to do, right? Like if a guy ejaculates, right, sex is finished, right? Like that's a very common story for couples. If a guy doesn't have an erection, sex can't happen because he can't, you know, put a penis in a vagina. So both of those things, right? Sex is like off the table because of those two things. Both of them revolve around his dick and what it is or is not doing. So the approach to, and that's a very performance oriented approach. It's like, okay, I've got to get my dick to do the right things, and if it doesn't, then, you know, it all falls apart. But that's really limiting as well, right? Similar to ideas around masculinity, you know, it's really much tied to phallocentrism, and guys, you know, emphasizing their penises. But shifting away from that, it's like, well, there's a bunch of other ways to have sex, right? There's a bunch of other ways to experience pleasure. And so a very simple strategy that I give to guys is like, be sexual with your partner, again, with their consent and like with agreements in place, which doesn't involve penis in vagina sex, right? Which doesn't involve intercourse. And beyond that as well, be sexual with your partner and take ejaculation off the table. Like, don't choose not to ejaculate, right? And when you've got the end goals, right, of ejaculation and penetration kind of taken off consciously, mindfully, intentionally, you're kind of left going, what else do we do? Which is a beautiful question, right? Because it's like, there's so many other things that you can do, and that like really broadens the experiences of pleasure that you can have, and the experiences of intimacy and sex that you can have with your partner. And yeah, I can keep on ranting, but that's like my my approach, I suppose, is a very pleasure positive approach. So guys will come to me with like function concerns, and I will attempt to kind of shift them out of thinking about their body as a machine and more as like, you know, a human being that experiences pleasure, that experiences ups and downs, that has these really beautiful experiences that they can share with their partner. And so we start to focus on the pleasure rather than the performance of sex. And with that comes like, you know, asking their partner what their body feels like, and, you know, where their pleasure comes from and where their boundaries are, and, you know, communicating and openly talking about it. So that's my shift for, and that's what I like. Now that's what I want to do with guys at a mass level, right? Is shift away from like just performing to actually experiencing pleasure. Because a lot of times performance oriented sex isn't very pleasurable, right? It's epitomized by porn, right? A lot of guys, like, they need an example of, you know, performance oriented sex. Just watch mainstream porn. That is performance oriented sex, like, hands down. And so a lot of guys idealize what they see on screen. They think that's the type of sex that I need to be having. That's quote unquote what good sex is, right? It's, you know, they got an erection straight away. They pound for, you know, however many minutes, 45 minutes, and then they ejaculate, and the money shot, and then sex is finished, right? Like, it's very much encapsulates that performance oriented mindset when it comes to sex. But porn stars will tell you that's not enjoyable for them. They say it looks good on camera, but it's actually not very pleasurable. In fact, that's the whole premise of one of my courses, is to shift that perspective. And this is what porn literacy is all about. It's like, if you actually listen to interviews with porn stars, they will tell you, both male and female, that the sex they're having on screen is actually not very enjoyable for them. They're just doing it, going through the motions, because that's what, you know, that's what the demand is, and that's what, you know, looks good on camera. Yeah, so again, I better stop there before I keep on ranting. But yeah, that's like my message to people, is to shift that.
Okay. Like you said about the phallus-centric approach to sexuality for men, there is one common denominator here with women, the equivalent of that for women is actually a vaginal orgasm centered approach to to sexuality for women. There's and this one, it doesn't come from porn. This one comes from actually the coaching, the sex coaching
Mm.
industry, if I can call it an industry. There are many women's coaches who talk about this, promote this, and say that everybody can have it at any time, where they leave you to imply that it's often and available. And that's not the experience of women. And they come with this request and they're thinking, what or how can I do it?
Mm.
So opening their perspective from, okay, let's let go of that a bit and zoom out. So
Do
yeah,
you
there
know? Do you know
is
where that comes from? Do you know where that idea comes from? Of like, you've got to be having vaginal orgasms.
a name actually, or
Oh, I mean, the reason why I ask is because um, that's a very like Freudian approach to sex, right? That's pretty much what he talked about. Is like vaginal orgasms are mature orgasms, clitoral orgasms are immature orgasms, right? Like, and
yeah.
so that's and so
Mhm.
we're still doing that, perpetuated by the sex coaching industry, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's, if you believe it or not, there are men that seek me for coaching because their partners, women, are not having vaginal orgasms, and they want to bring their women partners to vaginal orgasms.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a second here, this is not the right approach. You're not the right person to come to me with this request, actually. So yeah, so there are a lot of stereotypes, and it's also around showing yourself as a successful coach and selling to people, keeping them frustrated, like you said in the beginning.
Mm.
So, because frustrated people are better consumers. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
it's
it's
goal
really
oriented again, right? It's like, the goal is to have this particular orgasm, or the goal is to have this particular experience. And it's like when you have a goal centered approach to sex, then sex becomes like um, success or failure, right? It's like if I achieve the goal, sex was successful. If I don't achieve the goal, then sex was a failure, was unsuccessful, right? And I think that's such a terrible way to think about sex, right? Is like whether it was a win or a loss. And that lends itself to like competitiveness as well, right? It's like I can reach the goal faster than you can, or more times than you can, right? And that's when this comparison and competitiveness comes in when it comes to guys, you know, egocentric approach to sex as well, right? It's like I'm better at achieving things than you are. And I also think it's like it's a capitalistic approach to sex as well, right? It's like
yeah.
stealth capitalism coming in, and it's like in order for sex to be successful, you've got to achieve these certain things. It's got to produce these particular outcomes, and like we have this mentality, you know, kind of pervasively, which is like you need to constantly be producing things and striving towards things and achieving things, and don't waste any time because time is money and you're going to be hustling and you're going to be grinding. And a lot of guys buy into that mentality and they bring that into the bedroom as well, right? It's the reason why a lot of guys rush to penetration. They focus on orgasm. They almost like have a preoccupation with orgasm as well, to the point where I've spoken to a lot of women about this, where women feel pressured to orgasm from their partner, and so therefore fake it because a lot of guys don't know what the fuck they're doing in the first place. And so there's this really horrible dynamic playing out where a lot of women don't feel empowered enough to speak up about what it is that they feel is pleasurable for them, or where a boundary is for them. And a lot of guys think that they're God's gift to women, because they've had a woman maybe fake a couple of orgasms and now they think that they know what they're doing, and it's reinforced and perpetuated this shitty approach to sex, which if you just took some time to slow down, to focus on pleasure, to in the capitalist framework, to quote unquote waste time, right? And actually enjoy your experience, and and maybe not have to produce an end product from the sex, and actually just go, well, let's just have sex for pleasure's sake, right? But pleasure is
Mhm.
really demonized, especially in like men's coaching spaces. Pleasure is seen as like weakness or effeminacy, or something that you don't need, something that like men don't need pleasure. They should be fucking grinding and hustling, and be there's
Okay.
this like you know demonizing of comfort, right? Like if you're
Mm.
comfortable, you're weak, right? If you're comfortable, you're a beta male or whatever it is, right? Like, so very much pleasure is seen as this really negative thing for a lot of guys, and so because of that,
Because women claimed it too much, or
yeah, I think because it's framed as like as feminine, right? Pleasure is framed as feminine for a lot of these guys. And so, and again, anything that's feminine is, of course, not masculine. And if you do anything that's feminine, you're less of a man. And it just, again, perpetuates this whole really shitty way of approaching sex.
You know, I propose that we start a movement here through this interview. It is okay for women to be masculine at times and feminine, and it's okay for men to be feminine at times and masculine. Go through both roles and flow in their interactions. Really, it's okay for women to take leadership sometimes, even in intimacy, and it's okay to relinquish it also. It's when you put somebody in a box, it's like, why would you even interact then? What? Sorry.
Yeah. No, no, I feel you. I
I'm
feel you. I think there's so much value in like, I often encourage couples to like play around with those energies, right? That energetic exchange of like, yeah, because there's this kind of framework of like, well, if I'm the guy who has a penis and I'm penetrating my partner, then I must be the one that's dominant and assertive, and I'm the masculine penetrator, right? Like it's very much like that's how it's thought of. But you can play around with that dynamic, right? Just because you're anatomically penetrating someone doesn't mean that you're the person that's you know dominant or assertive or in control or masculine in that space. And a very simple way to play around with that is, if you're interested, and people that are listening can try this, is like have the guy tied to the bed and have his partner like in a kind of typical cowgirl position ride on top of him and grind on top of him, right? Penetrated, but like essentially like being in a that power shift, that power differential. Because you can still penetrate, you can still be the penetrating person, but that does not make you like the person who's being dominant or in control or assertive in that situation where you're playing around with those dynamics. And that can be a real big light bulb moment for a lot of couples. It's like, oh, there is more nuance to those fluctuations of energies, those fluctuations of experiences. It doesn't have to be this rigid thing, which is scary for some couples as well, right? It's one of the reasons why a lot of guys don't want to be penetrated, for example, right? Like if they want to, if they, God forbid, they explore prostate stimulation or anal play, right? Like that's a huge major thing for straight guys, because it's like the peak of femininity to be penetrated by something, right? And so it's this, and it's it's labeled as gay, and it's all this internalized homophobia and shit as well. But like,
homophobia there.
but you can play around with those dynamics without having to be penetrated yourself if that's too much for you.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying here can also be framed in the mindset that you don't have to do this all the time. It's like every once a blue moon, you can try it and just to see something else, not always sticking to the same role, which can be consuming sometimes or burning out somehow.
Yeah, and
It,
boring
it's
as
yeah.
well. It's like eating the same meal every time you're hungry for the rest of your life. And that's how I think about it anyway. It's like it could be a great meal, it could be your favorite meal. You could really enjoy that meal. But if you ate it every single time you were hungry, after a while you're going to be like, just give me something else. I need something else right now. I can't eat this meal one more time. I need a change. Right? So having diversity in your experiences of pleasure, right? And it doesn't have to be every single time. Everything's new, 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 diverse, diverse, diverse. Like some routine and familiarity can foster like deepness and intimacy and connection. But having, this cliche saying that, what is it? Change is the spice of life. Like that is essentially the same for your sex life as well. Like having an opportunity to explore diversity, having the openness to explore that is like, and the way that I frame it is curiosity. So just being curious about other things can be like, such a profound mentality to bring into your sex life.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's see what else we have here. We're up to question three.
Okay, great.
Is there a limit to which men grow? How much do they stay in coaching to transform themselves? If they stop, so if they seek a limit or they put a limit to how much they grow, what seems to be the reason?
Yeah, interesting. So I work with guys over a minimum of 6 months. That's my minimum that I will work with them, and I probably the maximum, even though I don't put a maximum on there, I probably have like at some level put a boundary in there of about 18 months that I will work with the guy. And the reason why I say minimum of 6 months is because I feel, and this is intuitive, not necessarily I can say with concrete evidence, here's, statistical data, is that like 6 months is a minimum amount of time for me to see realistic and sustainable change for the guys that are working with me. Because they can start to do things, and maybe we do it over the course of like a couple of weeks. But then if they don't have that accountability, they don't have someone kind of going like, hey, how's things going? How's it, integrating it essentially is like a big part of it. Spending time, slowly integrating things, then a lot of those changes that they make very often don't have any longevity. And so they end up falling back to previous patterns. There's a lot of hurdles that guys will come up against, where they'll find a lot of resistance. And if they don't have someone who's keeping them accountable, they'll be like, no, this is too difficult. I'm just going to go back to the way things were. A very common example that I see is like when I'm shifting men's experiences of sex from gratification to pleasure, like from performance oriented to pleasure oriented. Part of that journey, I suppose, is them really tapping into their experiences of pleasure. It's like really paying attention now to their physical sensations of pleasure, like what turns them on, where they find arousal, what parts of their body are really sensitive. And when they start to do that, when they start to really pay attention to that, oftentimes they find that they get turned on very quickly and sometimes even ejaculate quite quickly, where previously they hadn't experienced that, right? Because a lot of them, with this particular example, are just going through the motions sexually, and they last for however long they last, 10 minutes, but it's not very pleasurable for them. It's like it's gratifying. They get an ejaculation at the end, but when I ask them like, do you actually really enjoy sex? They're like, it's sex. Sex is sex, right? It's not really, it's not amazing, and it's just something they do. So when I get them to really tune into their experience of pleasure, they find that like, holy shit, like this is really arousing. This is really pleasurable for me. I'm going to come quite quickly. And they go, that's bad. And I don't want to, deal with that. I'll just go back to the way things were. Because now I've got this problem of ejaculating quite quickly, where once I didn't have that problem, and that brings up a lot of resistance for them, they feel like they're going backwards. And so I have to coach them through that hurdle essentially and get them onto the other side of that, where they've developed like a familiarity with that pleasure, a comfortableness with that pleasure, a confidence with that pleasure, and then they can start to move through it and experience like, that pleasure over a longer period of time. And like, and there's ways of doing that, I suppose, but like there's a light at the end of the tunnel that I have to help them see, I suppose. And so my work as a coach, I often say to my clients is like, I kind of want to equip them with a tool belt of things. Like I want to give them Batman's tool belt, where if things in the future after we've worked together pop up for them, and they will, because our sex lives are constantly changing over the course of our lives, and I think to not acknowledge that is doing yourself a disservice. Like your sex life will change, the things that you enjoy will change, your pleasures and the way that you experience your sexuality will change over time. That's a fact. The tool belt of things that I kind of give my clients and help them kind of develop is so that they have those tools to then navigate those changes when they occur. And so I kind of like want to try and work myself out of a job essentially with each client. It's like I want to get to the point where they feel really comfortable being like, Cam, thanks so much, man. I've got the tools now. I can go forward and I can like work on whatever it is that I want to work on. And I often give clients the option, right, of when we've finished our work together to be like, here's a one-off like call that you're welcome to book in like at any time in the future. And so I give them like that extra call. So, in like, and I usually get guys like a year or so later be like, hey Cam, sex has been amazing. This has shifted for us. Now this new thing has come up. Maybe they're exploring this new sex act, right? If they're into maybe exploring BDSM, or they've got like a new partner or whatever it is. And they're like, now this particular thing has popped up in this context. I just need a bit of guidance around that. And so we tune back in and I give them some coaching and some guidance around this new specific thing. But for the most part, the guys go on with some confidence and the tools to kind of do their own work and explore their sexuality over however many years they have left. So I guess there is like no limit to personal growth. That's kind of like my thinking. But when it comes to guys, the guys that I've worked with, sure. There's some guys who'll be like, yeah, cool. I've reached like the goals that I wanted to achieve with regards to being comfortable and exploring my sexuality, and now I'm good here. I feel comfortable here, and I want to stay here, and that's totally fine. But my anticipation is in later on in life, those guys will have challenges that pop up for them again, because we all do. And my intention is for them to have the tools to be able to navigate that personal growth in those moments. So, yeah, hopefully that answers your question a bit, I guess.
Yes, long-term thinking as opposed to what they're expecting. So
Yeah.
basically, if I were to put it in a nutshell, but yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, how many men do the work on leadership, courage, social investment also when it like among the men that seek your services?
Yeah, I get a mixture of guys, right? So like I've got some guys that have been doing like personal growth work, and they've been like, exploring like leadership, and maybe, looking at their money stories and doing like just personal development stuff. And then they realize, oh, sex is a big part of my personal journey now. And like, so they've come with all this amazing tools and knowledge already. And they're like, now I need to really acknowledge that sexuality is something I haven't looked at. I definitely have clients like that. But I also have clients that are like, have done no personal development work. They're kind of like, kind of from a place of desperation. They're like, something has to change. It's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back with regards to their sex life or their relationship. It's like, shit's, rock bottom, things need to change. And, if it's really serious and there's like trauma and stuff there, I typically refer them out to a psychotherapist. But if it's something that I feel like I can help them with, then we do work on it. And so I try and, as part of my, coaching with them, sex coaching specifically, and I'm very, clear that I don't do relationship coaching. I do sex coaching, and so I will usually share resources with them about like relationship, coaches or some colleagues of mine who I really trust, or I'll share with them some stuff around, finances, stuff that I won't do with them, but I'm like, hey, here's a resource you might want to check out, because sex and money are very much related, and if they're stressed out because they don't have enough finances, or they're not budgeting properly, or whatever it is, that stress is going to impact their sexual experiences. And so the interrelatedness of all these things is important. So I try and encourage them to like tap into other areas of their of their life, and of their personal growth. And something that I always share with them as well is like, and something that's part of my coaching is emotional regulation tools. Because when you start to tap into your sexuality, when you start to like, the analogy that I use here is like when you start to unlock these parts of your body physically and also psychologically. Like I give men a lot of practices that help them relax, that help them release tension from their hips and their pelvis and their lower back, stretching exercises, breathing exercises, whatnot. Is like physiologically speaking, they'll release tension, but we know that we store fear and anxiety and guilt and shame in our body, in our muscles, right? It's psychosomatic. So when they release those physical, tensions, then emotional tension starts to rise up for them. And so if I'm not giving them emotional regulation tools, being like, hey, when you start to do this work, you will start to not only experience more pleasure, you're also opening yourself up to experiencing more anger or more grief or more joy or more suffering or whatever it is, whatever, the full spectrum of experiences you're opening yourself up to when you focus on opening yourself up to more pleasure. Because it's kind of like, if we use energy as an example, right? Like you don't just go, oh, I just want to feel more of this sliver of energy here. You open yourself up to experiencing more energy in general, right? Energy as a holistic, or a whole collective, as opposed to like this little piece that you are trying to experience more of. And so that lends itself, the reason I bring that up is because that lends itself to like, there's some opportunity there to explore like, I mean, you said leadership before, and so like there's some leadership opportunities there. It's like, are you able to be a sexual leader, for example? It's something I speak to my clients a lot about, and that looks like, at least in my opinion, not top-down hierarchical leadership of like being commanding and being, giving instructions and directions, but it looks like leading by example and showing up from a place of vulnerability, showing up from a place of like openness. And the analogy that I have for that is, it's like jumping into a lake, right? When you're with your partner, you jump into the lake first, and you call out to your partner and you extend a hand to them and you say, "Come on in, the water's fine. Come and join me. Come and have some fun. Come play in this space with me." And that's like kind of leading by example. It's like create that space for yourself by being vulnerable, by modeling that, and then inviting your partner to join you. But a lot of guys can't do that to begin with because they are uncomfortable with those emotions and that vulnerability and that sensitivity and talking about their desires and their fantasies and their boundaries and things like that. A lot of guys feel uncomfortable doing that. And so they need to, process that themselves and then feel like comfortable enough to then go, hey, I can open up to my partner and kind of lead their partner in that particular way. So, yeah, there's more there, I feel like, but that's kind of where I'm going to finish.
Right. There's the next question, actually. Are there men who are attracted to and can stand in attraction with women in leadership roles?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think a lot of guys feel intimidated by women in leadership roles because of what I was saying at the beginning around masculinity. Like a lot of guys feel that, masculinity is, being a leader or is being assertive or is being dominant or is being whatever their very narrow
There's
definition of
that box
masculinity
again.
is. Right. Yeah. So when they see a woman uh, exhibiting those qualities, then he either will shame that woman, right, and say that she's masculinized or not being womanly enough or not being feminine or whatever it is. Like there's shame directed at her, or he'll feel threatened in his masculinity, right? That there's a sense that like, oh, if a woman can do that and she can be, especially if she's like in a leadership role and also like really sensual and stereotypically feminine, a lot of guys feel really threatened and intimidated by that because it's like encroaching on what his narrow definition of masculinity is. And so that's one of the reasons why I personally think a lot of guys feel the need to like put down women in leadership roles, and why there's like a lot of negative talk from alpha bro podcasters and things like that of independent women and women who are really taking charge of their life in that way. Um, so and there's a lovely saying, right, that like uh, boys are intimidated by powerful women and men are attracted to powerful women, right? And I feel like that's there's truth to that statement because I feel like those guys that have a really rigid, narrow definition of masculinity that do project that onto these women in leadership positions kind of exhibit that immaturity, I suppose. But there are plenty of guys who do like maybe who are attracted to that power. Like there's a lot of guys who are interested in having a partner who is maybe in a position of power, or they're interested in that power play dynamics, which can be something that plays out when they've got a woman who's in a leadership role. She maybe knows how to take charge in a sexual setting as well, and so maybe that's the reason why he's attracted to her in particular. But there's other guys that it doesn't matter to them, and there's a lot of women as well where they're like, it doesn't fucking really matter to me as long as there's some connection there and there's some intimacy there and there's some openness there and there's some playfulness there and there's some fun there and there's respect. It doesn't like your position as a leader in the work that you do or in like the group of people that you're around like doesn't impact their particular attraction. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that it doesn't matter at all. I definitely know that there's people that are attracted to and interested in it, and social status is a thing, right? And people pay attention to it. But I think a lot of other people as well go, doesn't really bother me. Like, are we having a good time together? Is it fun to be around you? Then yeah, we can get along.
I would say those are the people that have a higher self-esteem in a way and probably have worked on themselves a bit.
Yeah, there's a bit more security in who they are as a person, right? Like if you're feeling threatened as a guy because your partner makes more money than you, then there's probably some stuff on there around self-worth and around your sense of masculinity that you can do a little bit of work on, right? If there's insecurity being brought up around your partner being in a leadership role, um, yeah,
Yeah,
there's
sometimes
stuff to do.
leadership roles don't pay more.
Yeah,
So I was a leader in an NGO. I didn't have such a high income there, but I was in a leadership role. So, and I know about many women who are doing this and leading many projects in their field. So,
yeah,
but
yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. There's a sense of maturity and security in um, people that are able to like hold their own and still connect with someone regardless of what their status is as a leader or as a provider or as someone that is in that status. So yeah, I agree with you on
mhm. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
that.
Yeah. Okay. Now we get to more kinky questions. So,
Sure.
what do you think we see more dating profiles for dominating men? Kink, dom, submissive. We're talking about dating apps here.
Can you repeat that question? I just missed the start of that question.
Yeah. Why do you think we see more dating profiles for dominating men in apps? We're talking about the single men and single women who go on apps. Why do you think we see so many and more profiles for
Mm.
dominant males?
You know what? I think probably because of societal expectations, right? Societal conditioning. Like for a guy to admit or to acknowledge publicly that he's like submissive or that he's interested in being dominated or that he's interested in like the power play dynamics where he's the person that is submitting, for example, like really goes against societal conditioning and societal messages about what it means to be a man. Again, right? We're coming up against that really narrow definition of masculinity again that society likes to
Mhm.
perpetuate. And so I think a lot of guys have maybe some fear around doing that because of them getting labeled as something, right? Maybe there's some internalized homophobia there, some shame around it as well of being like, oh, what does this mean about my sexuality? What does this mean about my masculinity? Um, and and so I think that that's probably a major reason why. I also probably think that there's like, in terms of online dating as a phenomenon as well. I think there is there's some data to suggest that like hyper masculine men are um, get more matches than not so hyper masculine men, right? Like there's some data that suggests that like guys that are like really projecting stereotypical macho style masculinity do get swiped on more often than people that don't. I suppose people like guys that have photos of them fishing or whatever. I don't know what the fuck they do. I don't online date,
That's
but
a
I've
masculine
read
thing. I
data.
don't know many women who fish.
Yeah, yeah. So I think guys like hear stories like that and they're like, oh, I need to like present myself as this like alpha dominant guy because like that's where um those are the guys that are getting all the chicks or those are the guys that are getting swiped on. And so I think the sensationalizing of those stories as well puts a thought into guys' heads that like they need to project themselves as. So maybe there's guys. I don't know. I'm just speculating here, but maybe there's guys that aren't necessarily super dominant or into domination, but maybe like put themselves out there as a person who's dominant, um, for the sake of what that might mean for their dating prospects, I guess. Um, yeah, I don't know. There's probably some other things in there as well, but off the top of my head, I don't really have any other thoughts.
Okay. Here's another question. Why do men that have done extensive self-growth often follow polyamory?
Yeah, okay. I don't know if there's like I guess like anecdotally I could see that, but I don't know if how much data there would be to kind of back that up. That would be something I'd be interested in looking at. But I think like there's a I think there's a sense of there's a misperception of polyamory, right? Like firstly, like people don't fully understand. I feel like what polyamory is, and I often see it getting conflated or interpreted as like open relating or as like you know as like having, you know, multiple sexual partners, and it's like that's not necessarily polyamory, right? So like open relating and having multiple sexual partners is not the same as polyamory. I think that's like an important distinction
Yeah.
to make. Polyamory, just for people that are interested, is like, you know, having multiple partners, right? Poly, you know, it means multiple. Amory, short for amorous, meaning love, like so multiple loves. Um, and so like I think having the capacity to like do that ethically and openly and healthily, to be able to like be intimate and loving and in multiple relationships with people, requires a lot of emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, communication skills. Like it's tough to do, right? Like it's hard to do, and
Patience, a lot of it.
yeah, yeah, and like, and so shit will get brought up, right? I often talk to people that have, you know, been in polyamorous relationships, and they say like a lot of the growth that they have done personally has come from being in those relationships, because like stuff gets
Mhm.
brought up and you have to talk about it. You've got to set boundaries. You've got to talk about what, you know, what feelings are getting triggered for you, where like, you know, the experience of like limerence as well, and like, you know, seeing your partner in their pleasure with someone else, and like that bringing up, you know, love and joy for you, and that being like a really confusing thing. Like there's so much growth that comes from those experiences when they're done healthily and when they're done in a way that's like conducive for the growth. So I think that's probably why we might see guys that have done personal growth able to maintain those relationships, because they have the capacity to do it, because they've done communication skills. They're able to talk about what's going on for them. They recognize things when they get triggered in their body, things like that. Um, yeah, there's more there that I could say, but I'm just mindful of time.
Yeah, actually, I want to look at the reverse side. What about the guys that go into personal growth and sexual growth, and then they look at entertaining multiple sexual partners as the only way for them to engage? Not necessarily polyamory, not necessarily ethical, so not necessarily announcing everybody and getting everybody's okay, all the stuff there. Why do you think that happens? If you have an opinion on that also.
Yeah, I think there's probably you know, guys that are, you know, dating casually or having casual sex, and they're doing it in a way that's, you know, okay. You know, I don't think casual sex is inherently bad. I think you can have casual sex without treating people casually, and if you're like emotionally mature enough to be able to like be upfront about the fact that you're only interested in casual sex, and you're not having an agenda, and you're not leading anyone on, and you're not being coercive and manipulative, then I think there's nothing inherently wrong with that. So there's probably some guys that are doing that and being like, hey, I actually really enjoy sex, and I enjoy sex with multiple different people, and I'm okay with that. I understand that as, you know, what I want and what I desire, and you know, I'm you know, being upfront about that, and here's what I'm interested in, and you know, I'm leaving these casual encounters with, you know, not leaving a bad taste, you know, so to speak, in these partners' mouths, and they have a pleasurable time and they have an enjoyable experience, and it's done in a way that like honors that other person, as a human being, not as just an object to conquer or to, you know, use as a masturbation aid. I think there's you know, people doing that, and in a healthy way. There's probably also guys that are, you know, tapping into um, you know, a common thing that I hear from women is like, where are all the good men? You know, where are all the good guys? Where are all the guys that are doing the work? You know, and so I think there's probably some guys cashing in on that in a, you know, using
Yeah.
that as a way to like pick up women, right? It's being like, hey, I'm a I'm a guy that's done the work. I'm a you know, a spiritual fuckboy, so to speak, right? Like I've done the growth, I've done the work. I can say the right words, I've done the language, I can do this eye gazing thing with you, and they're using that in maybe a manipulative way in order to have sex with more women, because a lot of women go to those sexuality workshops and go to the development workshops, right? And so for guys that maybe have that agenda, it's probably a good place for them to demonstrate that they are doing the work, right? Or show that they're good material for a sexual encounter. So there's probably guys being manipulative about it as well.
Yeah, my take on that one is if you've really done the work as a woman, sooner or later you're gonna smell, figuratively speaking, smell the person that is a fraud in this sense, and the person who's genuine or authentic and actually doing the work.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
sooner or later, emphasis on later sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, the next question is for actually your take as a man for when it comes to women. What are some things that a woman could do to meet a good monogamous match?
Okay. I mean, I don't think I'm in a great position to answer this question because like I have been in a relationship for the last 7 years, a monogamous relationship, and the uh, and I don't teach guys about dating. I don't really keep up to date with like like I said, I'm not on dating apps, for example. I don't really know the online dating space. And I don't date men either, so like I don't know what to look for in a guy specifically. And so something that like if I reflect on my coaching, something that I often do with the men that I work with, for example, is like if I need to do some educating with them around women's pleasure and women's anatomy, I have a really beautiful colleague who I refer them to. So I have a collaboration with her where for my clients, one of their sessions is a session with her, and they'll go and do a women's pleasure and anatomy session with her because she's the one that has that anatomy, right? And she can tell you about it.
Mhm.
I don't have a vulva, vagina, clitoris, breasts, all that beautiful stuff.
Da, da, da.
So I can't I can talk about it, but it's not going to land as well if it comes from me as opposed to coming from her. And so I find that really valuable. So I kind of am applying the same logic here. It's like I would probably listen to women more so than me on this, right? Like women that date men and that have found beautiful relationships with some really lovely men that are interested in monogamy. I guess like my only real advice would be like be upfront about what you're looking for. This is a piece of advice that I give to everyone, regardless of like what their dating preferences are. Is like if you're interested in monogamy or not, if you're interested in polyamory, whatever. But if you're interested in monogamy, if you're interested in like having kids, if you're interested in starting a family, if you're interested in like having a career and that's the type of relationship you want is something that can grow with your career, whatever it is, be upfront about that sooner rather than later. And the reason why is
Mhm.
because, like, and this is a horrible way to kind of frame it, I guess, but like, you don't waste time then. You're not wasting your time. You're not wasting this other person's time, right? Getting to know them,
Yeah.
building up a connection, and then you say, "Hey, I'm interested in monogamy," and they're like, "Well, I'm actually interested in polyamory," or "I'm not interested in monogamy. I
Yeah.
want open relationship." And then you go, "Well, fuck, we've just wasted all this time getting to know each other, and now we're not like compatible.
Mhm.
Now there's no like future for that particular relationship. Obviously, there's could be potential for being friends and for like connecting in with other people and having a good time if you're that way inclined. But like in terms of that romantic progression of that relationship, if you're not disclosing what it is that you're looking for sooner rather than later, then there's opportunity that like what you are looking for is not actually what they're looking for as well, and therefore you run the risk of being like, well, shit, that was nice, have a good life, um, now we
Mhm.
now we can't go any further. So that's something that I say to people in general is like just just talk about what it is that you're interested in and just make that clear to people so that you're not stringing them along or that you're not wasting your own time.
Yeah, I totally support that also. Um, I think that there's also the capacity here to say what you're into actually, because I've several years back I used to date through dating apps. Just date, it's I never found a partner via those apps, so I quit it. But I often found that people were assuming, and although they were mentioning stuff on their profile, and I would think that what they wrote there was true, in communication, it turned out eventually that maybe they were interested in something else, or maybe they misunderstood my intention. So there's communication abilities on both sides, I would say here.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, because I can only imagine the miscommunication that could possibly happen with online messaging as well, right? Like it's hard enough to do it in person, and then with the technology barrier, it could also be a little bit harder. So yeah, I feel for you.
Mm. Okay. And the last question that I had here, and this one is very Australia related.
Okay.
Have you found a cultural difference between men in Australia and elsewhere? So I understood that in Australia there's the concept of opposite dating. I just heard of it like when I scheduled the interview with you. I had just heard of it, so
I've got
no clue
no
about it.
idea what that is.
Yeah.
I'm not doing myself very good as an Australian, not knowing what opposite dating is. Do you have a definition of that on your computer that you can share with me?
What I had heard, so what I had heard was that in Australia, women are supposed to take the leadership role. So propose to men or just take the leadership role in the dating stage. So opposite dating,
Ah.
as commonly in Western Europe and America and North America, men take the leadership role with taking more responsibilities there, maybe paying for more and stuff like that.
Oh,
And
interesting.
somebody, an American woman that I talk to frequently, mentioned this that, oh, in Australia, they have opposite dating. I was like, what's that? So she mentioned this.
Well, I mean, I'd never heard of it, and I can kind of, I guess I can kind of see it. I don't know if it's like a rule or anything here, but I definitely know that, like, here in Australia, in particular, like, it's a very outgoing culture. So Australians are, this is a very big generalization because there are different types of Australians, but like, what I've found, especially when I'm traveling and meeting other Australians abroad, like, Australians are very outgoing, and we're very like, I guess stereotypically like drinkers and larrikins and partiers, and that goes for women as well. Like I have seen, I used to work in a bar, so I've seen plenty of women be very outgoing, very drunk, like really having making the most of the night. And so I think like that out.
Right.
I think that outgoingness. I think that like confidence. Like there's definitely like the Australian kind of like laid back confidence, like the Aussie kind of culture, I suppose, like really emphasizes that. And so I definitely think that because of that, there's Australian women who would probably come across to people that aren't familiar with Australian culture as quite like assertive or as quite outgoing and as quite confident. And I used to live in America, and I can recall times where some of the Australian women who were there, and I used to play soccer, so they were Australian soccer players. Um, the guys would be like intimidated by them. The American dudes would be like, kind of intimidated, but like intrigued. They're like, like this. Why is this woman so like, brazen and bold and all the Aussies would hang out, and we were like, this is just how we hang out. But I definitely remember Australia, like the American guys being like, "Holy shit, I don't know what to do with this, Aussie chick." So that's
Woman.
probably, so that's probably, yes, that's probably what it is. I imagine. Yeah, what foreigners are maybe seeing.
Hmm. Okay, so those would be the cultural differences that you've noticed. All right.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, definitely.
yeah, I haven't lived outside of Romania for much. I mean, I traveled, but haven't lived, so I that one was totally new to me. Also,
Nice. Well,
yeah.
it's prompted me to think more about it as well. I'm going to go and do a little bit more research and see if there is any really
Mhm.
specific Australian differences that I'm missing there. But yeah, so I appreciate you
Yeah,
bringing it up because it's
I
really
can
intriguing.
totally connect you with the woman. She's a tantra teacher, facilitator, or trainer, and I can totally connect you with her, Deborah. I interview her a lot on my channel,
Cool.
and you can get more information from her because actually it came from her. I was like, okay, I haven't heard of this. Let me check.
That would be amazing. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. Yes, you're very welcome. Well, Cam, I really, really enjoyed talking to you. I'm great. We made it happen. And whether I get questions under this video or not, if I come up with some, is it okay to schedule a second one, maybe a few months down
Yeah,
the
for sure.
line?
We'll do a round two, and yeah, I'll I'll try not to rant as much and hopefully be a bit more concise with my answers.
No, don't worry about it. I've started doing rants on my channel also, so people here are more. I kind of prepared them.
Nice.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Beautiful.
okay.
Well, thank you so much
We'll
for
put
having
under
me.
the video. You're very, very welcome. We're going to put links to your Instagram, YouTube channel, website, so that, the guys here can find you, maybe work with you. And, well, thank you for taking the time. Yeah, we'll talk soon.
Yeah, thank you.